The Inventory Stela, does it confirm that the pyramids predated Khufu? Let's find out. History textbooks tell us that the dynastic Egyptians built the pyramids of Giza in the Old Kingdom era, to be precise. But there is a stela that's 2,600 years old, and it reveals that they inherited the Great Pyramids of Giza from a civilization far older, from the before times of Zep-Tepi, possibly. Let me explain. So this is quite a different story to the one told by the archaeologists. Could it possibly be that there is an artifact that does tell us a different story? In my opinion, the answer is yes. But why is this so important right now? It's because of the findings of the SAR scan done, which covers within the pyramids and under the pyramids of Giza. And this scan indicates an older age. And this stela essentially substantiates that. Let's look at what it says and why the archaeologists discredit it, as well as why I and others think that it is wrong to do so. The stela that I refer to, which is also sometimes called a tablet, dates back only 2,500 years to the tail end of the Egyptian Empire. So you might at this point ask, well, how does this timeline fit in with it? The information being about the time of Khufu, as there's like 2,000 years apart. Well, I will come to that. The stela, which is made of limestone, talks about Khufu and also lists out 22 divine statues belonging to a temple of Isis, and it states that the temple existed before the reign of Khufu, which is circa 2580 BC. Interesting, wouldn't you say? So we are talking about a piece of stone carved in about 600 BC, describing a situation that applies to a period 2,000 years earlier, at which time they recognised that some structures on the Giza Plateau are much older than the Old Kingdom. The tablet was found close to the Great Sphinx of Giza, but it's not the same stela or tablet that is referred to as the Dream Stela. So that one is also extremely interesting as well. The Inventory Stela is kind of interesting for all kinds of things, but it goes on to describe Isis as the mistress of the pyramids and Osiris as the lord of the roster. And that's all good stuff, but here's where it gets real. It states that the Isis temple was already there before Khufu started his building project. And the temple was discovered by Khufu east of the Great Pyramid and nearby to the Sphinx. I should point out at this time that it's pretty hard to discover something next to something that you haven't even built yet. It says that when he found it, he re-erected it anew. We would call that a restoration project today. After which he built a small pyramid for his wife, Henutsen, who is described in the stela as being the daughter of a king. But archaeologists don't buy into it. They say that although they can verify that this is a genuine artifact of the 26th dynasty, the ancient Egyptians lied in order to make it seem that the Temple of Isis was older than it really was, which would have given the temple more kudos. Maybe it is the case that the older temples got more kudos, but it seems like a fairly unconvincing way to cheat the system. The ancient Egyptians were very thorough record keepers, and even though some or much of their records have not come down to us, they've been lost to us today. I doubt they could convince the people of their day of this. The stela also uses a confusing mix of the language of the Old Kingdom and the language of their time. So, assuming that this is a copy of an earlier stela, then surely it's normal to change it sometimes along the way, using language and maybe some of the names that are more appropriate to that day. But this is another criticism levelled at it. So, archaeologically, what do we know about this temple? We know it's built on top of an older temple. Apparently, the older temple is the mortuary temple of Queen Henutsen's tomb, according to archaeologists, that is, and which may in turn be built on an even older structure. According to Wikipedia, the proof that the dynastic Egyptians created it as a fake is that Khufu is named by his Horus name first, not by his birth name inside a cartouche. But this is hardly proof. If the dynastic Egyptians created it as a copy of an older stela, then maybe they didn't make it as an identical copy. Maybe they adjusted names and syntax in certain places in line with their current times. The format they used was common at the time that it was made, but not as much at the time of Khufu. But why is this a surprise? They probably thought they were improving it. The second criticism is we have no reference to the goddess Isis prior to the 5th dynasty, at least not that we know of. Once again, they may have updated the names for a more modern, shall we say, audience. And the final criticism by the archaeologists is that Henutsen was not known as the daughter of a king. But once again, why would this be such a big surprise? If she was the wife of Khufu, the king, why would it be a big surprise if she wasn't the daughter of an earlier king? So in my opinion, none of these are particularly convincing ways of refuting this stela. If you want a detailed explanation of all of this, I can highly recommend a paper by Manu Saifzadeh, which I will attach a link to in the comments. So where does all this lead us to? Let's just read the English translation and see what you think. So this is Gaston Maspero's translation of the key parts of the stela. Live Horus, the Meza, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Khufu, is given life. This seems to be saying that Khufu was the incarnation of Horus. Certainly not an uncommon claim by a pharaoh to be the living representation of a particular god. It goes on, he found the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, by the side of the cavity of the Sphinx, on the northwest side of the house of Osiris, lord of Rostau, and he built his pyramid beside the temple of this great goddess, and he built a pyramid for the king's daughter, Henutsen, also next to this temple. This is the passage with the most to unpack. He found the house of Isis, so the temple predated Khufu, the temple of Isis, that is. Isis is described as the mistress of the pyramid, so the pyramid, assumed to be the Great Pyramid, also predated Khufu. It states clearly that he built his pyramid, and a pyramid for the king's daughter, Henutsen, who was his wife, beside this temple. So this indicates to me that the Pyramid of Khufu is not the Great Pyramid, but rather it is one of the pyramids referred to as Queen's Pyramids. It then goes on to say the place of the Sphinx is on the south of the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, and on the north of the house of Osiris, lord of Rostar. Presumably, this would be what we call the Valley Temple. These directions just confirm that we have the right location for the Temple of Isis. It later goes on to say more about the Sphinx. Quote, he restored, that is Khufu, the statue, all covered in painting, of the guardian of the atmosphere, who guides the winds with his gaze. Speaking of the Sphinx. So it sounds very much like this is Khufu doing restoration work on the Sphinx, which is kind of odd considering archaeologists claim that it didn't exist until the time of Khafre. So, if we are to believe this stela, there are many structures above ground that predate the dynasty of King Khufu. So, if there are so many structures above ground that predate dynastic Egyptians, then how many structures below ground also are from the earlier times? And this brings us back to the latest findings from the SAR scans underneath the Great Pyramids. And it kind of goes full circle, because this indicates that the structures underneath the Giza Plateau could possibly be a lot older than the archaeologists, or should I say, the historical narrative